Hello viewers, and a warm welcome to the show this evening. My name is Chef Andy, your host, and today we are going to be working on some very beautiful ingredients and recipes. But before I proceed, I will of course also allow the guest on my show today to introduce herself. She is of course a very big cook, home cook. She's also a student. She's also a mother as well, and she'll probably tell you a little bit more about herself as we proceed with the show. So Milkah?
Yeah. Thank you, Chef.
Karibu.
Good evening, viewers. I'm very pleased and honored. My name's Milkah Ndongo. You can call me Mama Wade. I'll be pleased. Yeah, I'm a student. Looking forward to graduate in December. Yeah, I love food. I'm a foodie. I love cooking, trying new recipes. So I can't wait for what you have for us today.
Perfect, Milkah. Thank you very much. Now, of course, before we begin this very simple process, very important that I mention what we'll be working on today. So we're going to be making a very simple meatball recipe. We're going to be making meatballs in bechamel sauce. We'll be serving that with a bit of fries and a very small side salad. So now we're going to of course introduce the ingredients in front of us before we proceed, just to also give you viewers at home an idea of what we'll be working with today. Now from the very front, you'll require about 1 tablespoon of some unsalted butter. You'll also require about 1 teaspoon of garam masala and 1 teaspoon of Chinese spice powder. You'll also require some fresh thyme and some dried parsley. You'll also require some ketchup, which you'll be serving your fries with, a bit of oil to fry, and a bit of some garlic and ginger powder. You're also going to require 1 whole egg, a bit of some chopped white onion, and about 80 grams to 100 grams of some lean beef mince. You'll also require some breadcrumbs, which will aid in making your meatballs, a bit of some imported lemons, a bit of some flour as well. You also require a bit of some potatoes. So I'm going to be using 3 medium potatoes that have been peeled and already chopped. You'll also require a bit of some arugula leaves, some wedged tomatoes, a few onion rings, some salt and pepper to season, and last but not least, in the big beautiful white pot, some milk that we'll be using to make our sauce. But before we continue, I will of course give you this chance to sit back, relax and unwind, and we'll catch you after a short break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in, I and Milkah are going to start this very simple recipe. So Milkah will of course begin by handing you this big bowl, and I can ask you to move this way. Now Milkah, I don't know if you've made meatballs before.
No.
Not at all.
But looking forward to.
So this is going to be a good experience for you.
Yeah.
So very importantly, our mince, our base ingredient. So while we're using lean mince, it doesn't have so much fat, so it's actually very nice when making meatballs. It doesn't pour out any oil. And as for those of you also watching, remember, if you're looking for a very good mince quality, I always recommend have your mince done to order. So pretty much walk up to your butcher and select your meat and have them mince it for you then. That way, that is the only way you can be able to certify the quality of your mince. Some of us, of course, are always tempted to pick our mince from the frozen section of our supermarket. One particular caution point I will mention at that point is You may not be able to know what went into the mince that is already pre-packed, so I will always recommend have your mince done to order. It will of course never let you down in that respect. And of course, if you're going to be making meatballs, do mention it to your butcher that you're going to be making meatballs. He will of course recommend a very, very good portion of fat to meat content for you to get a very, very good meatball quality. So next up, Milkah, we are going to start by adding our ingredients, beginning with our chopped white onion. You can also use red onion for the same recipe. Next, we are going to crack in 1 whole egg. Simple as that. So you can start mixing that through. And of course, as she continues to mix that, very important to also incorporate the rest of the ingredients, especially your seasonings that you'll be incorporating to this recipe. So I'm going to add my garam masala and my 5-spice powder. I'm also going to add my garlic and onion powder at this stage. Remember, these are particularly very, very good ingredients, especially when you're building that beautiful all-round flavor in your mince. I'm also going to add 1 teaspoon of some dried parsley. Very, very good, especially if you're looking to give it a nice, beautiful burst of flavor. Next up, we're also going to be adding to that our breadcrumbs. So this is just store-bought breadcrumbs, very, very usual, kawaida. You can find these anywhere.
And will you find them as breadcrumbs or the mkate, the usual mkate, you make it for yourself?
No, I can recommend 2 methods of getting good breadcrumbs. For instance, if you have maybe old bread that is sitting in your kitchen and it's not gotten off yet, what you can do is you can put it in the toaster. Itakauka kabisa, it'll be nice and stiff. And what you can do after that, you can take a bowl like this, maybe take a big stick, maybe a muiko or something that's got a blunt end, and you can just begin to pound. Another method you can also use is by using a grater. So you can toast the bread, and then when you pass it through a grater, it will probably give you the same consistency. But of course, if you're looking at cutting the cost and saving time, you can of course go to any particular bakery. They should actually be able to have breadcrumbs there. But very important, Milkah, as well to remember, always check the sell-by date. So make sure never to buy breadcrumbs that have expired because they may have some mold. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Perfect. Now, of course, very importantly, always remember to season. So we will add a bit of salt. And we're also going to be crushing in some black peppercorns. So Milkah, especially for you, if you're at home and you're finding it hard to find such a device, you can just get regular black pepper powder. It'll work just the same. So what happens is this beautiful device, you actually get your black peppercorns while they're still whole, and this beautiful device allows for you to crush them to order. And also another tip I can share, if you haven't bought this as well, some of you watching as well may want to take note of this. You know, whenever you're trying to make pilau and you don't want those spices to go in the big sizes, the whole spices, this can also help. So just add them in here, and once you crush, it'll just give you a good masala powder. Yep. Right, so very, very simple points to begin with. Now, next up, I'm also going to be adding some fresh thyme. Milkah, I don't know if you've worked with this before. So this is a particular, very, very good, just have a smell. So this is very, very good, especially when working with meat. It is actually as good as using dania. But the beautiful thing about thyme is it has a very, very strong flavor. And what happens is, just like you can be able to smell it on the leaves themselves, it's actually going to carry the same flavor into your meat. So it's going to give it a nice, beautiful, all-round flavor. So I'm just going to crumble that in there, and I'll reserve the rest. And of course, once you get to this point and your mixture is almost nice and consistent, it of course will be a bit dry at this stage. You can proceed to add a very, very small dollop of some oil. Remember, one particular good thing about adding oil is it also allows for your meatballs to be nice and moist inside. So once you begin to fry them, they won't go very dry. Yeah. Well, of course, once your mixture is done, very important that you begin to work your balls. So very importantly, always be sure to begin by rinsing your hands. Once you washed your hands, be sure to make sure your hands are always dry when working with food. So Milkah, never be tempted to work with your hands while wet. What happens is if you had some germs on your hands, if you touch the meat while your hands are still wet, it's very easy to transfer germs. So especially for you who's cooking for your son at home, be sure to make sure to be very, very hygienic. That way you can avoid any chances of poisoning. Now, very importantly, always begin by rolling your bowls a little bit in advance. So I'm going to just take this out of the bowl. Now, Milkah, something I've also enjoyed using on many occasions is an ice cream scoop. I know you've seen one of this before, yeah? Now, one particular thing that's very beautiful about this is that it actually makes very, very nice meatballs. So one thing I like to do is I like to first remove the attachment. So basically first I take out that little piece, and this I can put back later on. Now what I like to do is I like to just grab my scoop and just press the meat in like that. So the idea is to press against the bowl so that it can make sure the mixture is nice and compact. And once you've pressed it in completely and it's almost nice and flat, you can just knock that on a surface and it will make sure all your meatballs look exactly the same. So I'm going to let you continue with that. Now, of course, something I also wanted to mention, I'm sure you can all be able to see the lemons that I have at this on set today. Now, two particular things you can be able to do to enrich the flavor of your meatballs. You can, of course, first of all, make your meatballs, fry them up, and then maybe drizzle some lemon juice over them before finishing off. Or secondly, you can actually serve the lemon wedge or maybe serve some lemon wedges aside to your meatballs. It's always going to bring a nice, beautiful, refreshing feel, just like it would do with a samosa. But one thing to always mention, don't be tempted to add the lemon at any particular stage before it goes onto the pan, because it will, of course, aid in making your meatballs shrink. So never be tempted to add when the meat is still raw. It will make the meat shrink very fast.
I think I need some lessons here.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through it once more. So it's very simple. So what you do is have your hand at the back of the board or where you're going to be pressing onto. So what you'll realize is when you press towards that part, you have much more control over the bowl. So once you press it next to where you are, it's much easier. But for instance, if it looks like this, you can just press it sideways like that. And the outside will break up very easily, and then you can now proceed to press it on. But remember, this is only a portioning process. Once this is done, we're of course going to roll them by hand, and then we'll proceed to fry. Right, so while you continue to do those, I'm going to jump this side, and I'm going to start off by heating up the pan that we will be frying our meatballs on. So very, very simple. As I mentioned, one particular beautiful recipe that you can be able to use at home. And I think, Milkah, this should be a nice, easy recipe for your son, yeah? Should be nice and easy to make this. It of course doesn't take much time. As I always mention on the show, if you're of course looking at cutting corners or reducing the time, you can also mix this in advance and then keep it in the fridge. Then maybe almost before dinner time, you can now form your balls, and you can also proceed to fry and make everything else. So of course, as she continues to do so, I'm just going to grab some oil on the side here. So very, very important that I mention, very important that you also work with a very nice wide pan. Beautiful thing about this is it actually allows for you to play around with the meatballs as they continue to cook. And of course, it gives you much more room to give your meatballs quite a bit of space to be able to color evenly as you continue. How are you doing, Milkah? May I help you? Yeah. Perfect. Right, so I'm going to help you shake that out. If of course it's still stuck, remember this already portioned the bowl for you. So you can just remove it and put it together. So as I said, this is just a tool to make sure the sizes are the same. So once more, I'm just going to take you through it so that you see it. But of course, you will try it at home, yeah?
Definitely.
For sure. Right, so again, of course, by doing this over and over, it becomes much easier. Right, once more. I know it looks easy when I do it, yeah?
Yeah, it does.
Right, so just to finish off that last bit. And then onto the board. So this you can just put on top there. All right, now as we proceed now to begin the first process of cooking, be sure to add your oil and allow that to take some time to heat up. Remember, when frying meatballs or any particular different cuts or textures of meat, be sure to allow your pan to be nice and hot. For this reason, it will actually allow for you to get a nice brown color. It's also going to really activate that beautiful stage of caramelizing or giving the meatballs a nice beautiful color. So one particular thing, make sure the pan is nice and hot before you add the meatballs. That way you'll get the color nice and quick before you actually overcook them. So the idea is to start with the pan very hot. Not so hot, but at least it should be at almost smoking. And then what happens is we're going to reduce the oil after that, or reduce the heat, and then it's going to allow the meatballs to cook on the inside. So you start high and then you reduce as you continue to finish. So of course I'll take you now through the first process. So it's very simple. Once you can grab a piece, go for it. Now, very important when making meatballs, remember the ice cream scoop or any particular spoons that you may use to portion out, they may not actually they may not actually be able to get out any particular air pockets that may be inside your meatballs. So you will always, of course, have to work with your hands just to make sure that you can actually get any particular air pockets out, and also that your meatball doesn't break. I think you've seen on occasion, maybe you try and cook and it falls into two. So the only technique to getting that to hold its shape, you're going to grab a piece. So first we begin by pressing. So just press it completely. So what we're doing now is we are squeezing all the air out so that it's nice and firm. So you can do that for anywhere between a minute to 2 minutes. If you're making this with your son, make sure he's in the kitchen just pressing and pressing. And it's actually a very good way to motivate kids, especially when you're cooking. I know for some of you home viewers, there's many occasions that you try and, of course, send your kids outside the kitchen or chase them from the cooking process. But remember, you can, of course, always have them in the kitchen helping out. Just be sure to make sure he's not near oil or any fire, and, of course, not near any knives or any chemicals. That way, you can, of course, be able to also save your efforts in the kitchen, yeah? Right, so once you've squeezed that completely, you're just going to begin to roll it like that. So what you're going to do is, as you roll, you're going to use your thumb to give it a shape. So you're going to go round and then squeeze. So, and then, of course, as you roll, also continue to squeeze. So it's a very, very simple process. Just go nice and slow. And then as you get to the end, you'll just continue to roll it out like that, and it should give you a nice, beautiful ball. So I'm going to let you finish the first one, and I'm going to let you do a second one while I let this one sit on the side. Then, of course, for those of you who are watching, once more, very important to take this time to make sure that your meatball is nicely compact. Remember, any particular air pockets will result in your meatball splitting in half. Or even, of course, even if you're baking them, they will, of course, crack open. This may not look very appealing when you're plating or when you're serving. So be sure to take some good time when doing so. It will actually pay off at the end. Right, so how are you doing, Milkah?
I'm trying.
You're trying, yeah?
Yeah.
It's not so hard. It's not so hard.
It's not so hard.
It's not so hard. So your hands may be a bit sticky, but as you continue to work, the meatball will come off the hands very, very easily. And you remember the oil we added earlier? Yeah. That's basically what makes it easy for it to not stick on your hand. Oh. I know for most of you who are watching, there's some of you who pretty much have used meatball recipes that contain a bit of flour. It may, of course, be very, very sticky when working with flour, especially in your mixture. So be sure to either avoid the flour when mixing and maybe just use it for just dusting the meatballs before they go into the oil. That should also, it will also aid in making sure that they get a nice, beautiful cooking texture on the outside. Right, so let's see how you did. Yeah, perfect. So you can place that here, and I'll let you do the next one. So you see they're very alike. Yeah. Very nice and simple, yeah? Okay. Right, so as Milkah finishes off that last piece, I'm going to reheat that pan once more. It did get a little bit hot and I wanted the oil to cool off slightly. But of course, very important to move your pan around. Always make sure that most of or all of the surface of your pan is actually beautifully coated in the oil. This will of course make sure that even while moving the meatballs around, they're of course going to continue to color very, very evenly. Right, so I'm just going to clean my hands very quickly. And of course, we're going to begin the process by adding the meatballs. So a very, very simple technique of placing your meatballs on a hot pan without actually splashing oil on yourself. Just tilt the pan forward like that and then just drop it. So it's actually going to make it much easier for you to not burn yourself. Perfect. So for the last piece, in it goes, and you can proceed to wash your hands. So very, very simple, ladies and gentlemen, very simple, fast process of making meatballs. We are, of course, going to take a very, very short break and allow this to continue cooking, but please don't move from where you are. You definitely want to see the next step, of which we are going to be making our very, very simple bechamel sauce. And I'm also going to be showing Milkah some very, very simple tips and techniques of incorporating butter, milk, and flour, and combining that into a very, very simple sauce. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers. For those of you who are just tuning in, we've pretty much finished browning our meatballs. So I'm just going to take these out and I'm going to allow Milkah to season them very, very lightly with a bit of some lemon juice. And as you can be able to see, a nice, beautiful, even color over the top. Should actually be almost nice and spongy as well to the feel of your tongs. Of course, always make sure to also allow any excess oil to drain off before removing. And all you need to do at this stage is allow them to cool off before you begin your next process of making your sauce. So I'm just going to leave those there with you. So I think you can be able to season them for us with a bit of some lemons. But of course, I do want to find out how you cut your lemon. So maybe you're going to explain to us how you slice your lemon, or what you do with the lemon before you cut it.
Before you cut, I'm going to share is it a trick or
let's call it a tip.
A tip.
Uh-huh.
And it taught us.
Uh-huh.
You roll it.
Uh-huh. Actually, for those of you paying attention, as I mentioned, Milkah is, of course, a very big follower of the show. And she's actually managed to wow me by pulling out a very simple technique that I actually shared on the show some time back. So what she's doing now is basically a simple process. We call it extraction. It's basically pressing any particular citrus fruit or any citrus fruit on a surface by rolling it back and forth. And what this does, it actually allows for you to concentrate the juices inside the lemon, making it much easier for you to squeeze the juices out. So Milkah, thank you very much for paying attention to our show that far.
I always do. I don't
Perfect.
take the tips for granted.
That's very, very interesting. And of course, for those of you watching, I think you've managed to learn a tip or two from Milkah. So if you are, of course, watching as well, do make a point of writing some of these things down. Remember, you could actually be able to teach someone, maybe even in your own household. Maybe you can actually show off to some of your guests over the weekend, you know? Yeah. Right, so as Milkah finishes that off, I'm also going to mention the sauce that we're going to be making next. So Milkah, we're going to be making a very simple sauce by the name of a bechamel sauce. So bechamel. So in translation, this only refers to a white sauce. So we're going to go through a few techniques of a few processes of making it, which I'm of course going to explain as we go. Very important to mention, for this particular sauce, you will of course require maybe 3 to 4 ingredients alone. Very importantly, you will require some butter, you'll require some flour, and you'll also require some milk. We are of course going to be cooking it on a pan very, very shortly. So I'm also going to be taking you through each particular step, and I'll of course proceed to mention any bit of detail that you may want to find out during that process. So Milkah, how are you doing so far?
I'm good. Half will be okay?
Half is okay. So we can of course save the other half. All right, so by pretty much allowing the lemon juice to soak up, or rather by simply drizzling a bit of lemon juice over your meatballs, what this basically does is it allows for your meatballs to start absorbing that beautiful citrus juice to them. It also keeps your meatballs nice and juicy. And of course, with the lemon juice drizzled over, it means we're going to impact a nice, beautiful kick of flavor. All right. So I'm just going to let those sit aside, and we will start this simple process. So Milkah, once more, I will ask you to come to this side of the table. And we are going to be whisking very, very gently as we continue. So very importantly, start with a bit of butter. Now, I'll also mention at this stage, if you're tempted to use margarine like Blue Band, for instance, it may not work for the same process because this is a dairy product, so it has a bit more fat than Blue Band. Of course, if you are going to attempt to make it with Blue Band, it of course will change the recipe quite a bit. But of course, you can be able to go online. There's very, very different alterations for making your own white sauce. You could actually be able to find one that's almost vegetarian friendly. Right, so into a pan, we're going to start by adding our butter. And what we're going to be making first is called a roux. Yes, a roux is a very, very simple combination of a bit of flour and a bit of some butter. And basically, we're going to allow the butter to continue to melt right up until it's completely disappeared. So it also helps by moving your pan around a few times. Nice, beautiful, rich color coming through. Right, so once that is melted through, we're going to start to add our flour. So you can start whisking as we continue. So the roux is basically what's going to make the sauce nice and thick. So this is basically the thickening process. And what it entails is basically allowing the flour to cook off the excess starches with a bit of the butter. So you should actually, for a bit of a sauce of about a cupful, you should actually be able to pull it off very lightly with about a tablespoon of some flour and about 3 to 4 tablespoons of some, 1 tablespoon butter and about 3 to 4 tablespoons of some all-purpose flour. Right, so you see that texture we got into now? Yeah. So this is basically the roux. Oh. And this comes in 3 different stages, which I'll explain as we go.
Now this is the milk.
Then this is the milk, so continue whisking. So very important also to add your milk in very small amounts. So just continue whisking continuously and don't stop. Then you can also pull the pan back off the heat slightly, just to control the heat as well. Right, so very important to mention, as you make your roux, the idea is to add your milk in small amounts. This is basically to allow for your flour to also absorb the flour nice and easy. It will also make sure that you don't actually form any lumps in your sauce, making the mixture nice and smooth and allowing for you to get a nice simple consistency. Right, so now I'm going to come and assist you, and I'll allow you to pour the milk now. So now something also to mention as you're making your roux, you see those brown, that almost cooked part of the roux that's on the side? Yeah. Always try and make sure to avoid it. And the only way you can do so is you can place your pan on the heat slightly just to keep the mixture nice and warm. Then you can remove it from the heat. But one thing very important, especially for the sauce, the only thing you should remember most of all is never stop mixing. So the mixing process is just continuous right until the end. So you can add some milk. And what will happen is by controlling the temperature, the milk will also not heat up too quickly, and it won't also make it too cloudy. So as we continue, you'll continue to see it form into a sauce. Keep adding. So for those of you, of course, who have not tried to make a roux before, remember, I wouldn't suggest trying to make this to order if you haven't done it before. There are, of course, different recipes that you can be able to find online on roux, on white sauce making or white sauce preparation. There is also an array of ingredients that you can also add to this recipe, such as nutmeg. Have you heard of nutmeg before?
No.
Also a very, very good, actually that will be the homework for today. You know, on my show, I actually always give homework.
Yeah, I'll go and look for.
So I'm going to allow for you to go and have a look at the white sauce recipe online, and you let me know what you find out.
Okay.
And I'll be able to explain any details that you may not be able to understand. Right, so as you can see, it's almost now turning into a saucy consistency.
Yeah.
But of course, very importantly, we have to keep mixing and mixing and mixing. So it's an only tiring process. And if I can share a tip, Milkah, back in the days when I was training as a chef, there's not one person in my class who loved to make this. And the reason was basically because most people try and get the sauce smooth from the beginning.
Oh.
And another thing is, if you, of course, don't get the coloring right, the color will be very, very dark. And instead of having a white sauce, you're going to have a brown sauce. So to actually maintain the white sauce consistency sometimes may be a trick, especially maybe when you begin, if your butter, of course, melts and it continues to brown, the mixture will, of course, change color completely. So very, very important to mention that if you're going to be trying this out, at least try it maybe once or twice, and then you can proceed to maybe try it out and prepare for the guests when they visit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, so the white sauce is almost complete now. We are, of course, going to continue cooking it on and off the heat. This is, of course, just to make sure that we actually cook away all the starches. Right, simple as that. Now, of course, very important to also mention while you're working with white sauce, you of course need to have a very, very pure consistency. So one way to make sure that you'll get it right and it's not lumpy, always have a whisk or a sieve. So what you'll do is you're going to hold this for us right over the pan, and I'm just going to pour that through. So
This is to prevent the lump.
Yeah, this is basically to remove any lumps that are in our sauce. It's also going to remove any bit of flour particles that haven't cooked through, making sure that the sauce is also nice and smooth and it doesn't have any particular lumps. Because what happens is the same lumps that you see on the pan, you'll actually be able to taste them once the sauce is served as it is. So if you can be able to look at the two consistencies on the pan, let me just get this out of the way. So if you look at the consistency when we started and now, you can see this looks more like a sauce, yeah? It's more consistent and smooth. Simple as that, and your white sauce is finished.
Yeah.
Yes. Right, so I'm going to get that out of the way. And now as we allow that to continue cooling off, I'm also going to turn on the heat on the end here. We are, of course, going to be frying up some of the potatoes that we have on the side, so you can grab those for us as well. Very, very important tool to also have in the kitchen. Do you have one of these at home?
Yes, but the plastic ones.
The plastic ones. So it doesn't matter if it's plastic or metallic.
Yeah.
I always recommend, if you're going to be making things such as fries or anything that you want to drain, it's a very, very handy tool. One particular beautiful thing about this is, first of all, it will allow for you to not have any water getting into the oil because it can cause a fire. And of course, once you allow them to drain, it will also not spark once you add your potatoes in. So just very simply, we're going to pour those in. And basically, just by giving that a very, very quick shake, simple as that, you will of course be able to drain your water a little faster. You can of course also allow it to sit right over your bowl, just as we've done, and it will continue to gradually drain, of course giving you just a bit of time to allow for your oil to come to the simmer. Now something also we're going to be doing is a very, very simple salad. So as I allow those to drain, I'm going to ask you to grab the onions.
Very ones.
So you can pour those in there. And then you can also grab the green leaves, the arugula leaves. Now these are particularly very, very good for salads. I actually want you to have a taste of this and tell me what you think. So it's actually, you can actually eat it as is. It's not actually recommended for you to cook this. It's actually just a very, very good alternative from using lettuce. So maybe you can have a taste.
I only see this. Let me
have a taste and tell us what you think. How's the flavor like? It's a bit sharp, almost pepperish, yeah? So the beautiful thing about arugula leaves, they carry that bit of pepper in them. So if you're maybe making a salad and you mix some of this inside, it's actually going to give it a nice, beautiful flavor. And this, as much as, just like you have lettuce, they're not particularly greens that can be cooked. You basically use this to make any simple salad. Right, so we are going to add those into a bowl.
As whole as they are.
Just as whole as they are. Then very importantly, we'll season with a bit of some salt. And of course, some black peppercorns. Now what you're going to do for us is you're going to toss them with the tongs. And of course, very importantly, I will mention, I always like to drizzle just a little bit of oil, especially when dressing salad. So I'm just going to drizzle just a little bit, shouldn't be too much. And of course, very important that you also have a bit of an acid that can cut through the richness of your oil. So you can of course grab a sieve as well, or any particular sieve of your choice. And you can squeeze that other half of your lemon. Right, so you can mix that through. Right, so as Milkah continues to finish off our simple salad, I'm also going to begin to start frying up our potatoes. So I'm just going to toss those into the oil. We're going to allow those to cook until golden brown and crispy. So we're going to continue to cook this off, and when we do come back, we are going to take you to the last and final process of plating this very simple dish. And I will also take you through the last process of combining your meatballs with that bechamel sauce, taking us to the last and final part of the show where I'm also going to be sharing some very, very simple serving suggestions. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers. If you're just tuning in, you've pretty much missed out on so much that we've been doing here with my beautiful guest Milkah. But of course, we are going to just take you roughly through the plating process. I will of course just recap on what we've done as we continue. But before I do so, we are going to begin by taking out the potatoes from the oil. So as I mentioned a little earlier, very, very good and handy tool. If you can be able to, or if you have one metallic one, it also helps when draining your fries when they come out of the oil. So I'm just going to...
What about using some, is it serviettes or...
Yes, you can also use serviettes. But one thing I will share about using a strainer, for instance, you see all the oil that you may lose out on when you use a serviette? Now what happens is when you're using a strainer or a colander like the one I'm using, what happens is any excess oil will come to the bottom of the dish and I can be able to save it. So it's also a very, very handy tip for those of you watching. If you're looking at also maybe, you know, there's times in the kitchen where costs really go high and maybe you're trying to really, really press down, especially for you as a home cook. I know you're looking at ways to, you know, to save. So this is a particular beautiful way, because what happens is any particular excess oil will come down here and you can still be able to recycle the oil, and you can also make sure that you didn't lose out on it at all. Right, so once those are done, we're going to season this very, very lightly. So I'm going to be using something that we did not introduce on the show. I do have some za'atar spice. This you can of course be able to buy locally. I would recommend, it's not, I will also mention it's not a very easy spice to find, but you can smell that and kind of get the idea of za'atar. So za'atar is basically a beautiful blend of different ingredients. It's got some thyme, it's got some coriander powder, it's got some cumin powder, it's also got some sesame seeds. So it's a lot of different herbs and spices that have been blended together for it to be called za'atar. So what we'll do is you're going to add that in here. You can sprinkle it and we can toss this through. Can add a bit more. So very handy tool as well. As I said, even when seasoning, allows for you to toss your ingredients together. Right, so our fries are done. Now we're pretty much almost to the plating stage. But before we do so, very important that I reheat that sauce very briefly before we continue to add the rest. And while we do so, as we allow that to reheat, I'm also going to show you a very simple way of plating. So onto this nice big plate, I'm going to give you some beautiful tips on how to impress Wade when you get home or when you try this over the weekend, yeah? So very simple technique I like to use with the ketchup. Just take almost 3/4 tablespoon and then just place that at the corner of the plate. And do you know what I'll do next? I'm just going to go right across the plate like that.
Okay.
You see, it makes it look a little nicer, yeah?
Yeah.
Then you can have your sauce on the side like that. Once that's done, so you see what happens is I've pretty much almost split my plate in two. So what happens is I'm looking at having my salad, my potatoes, and my meatballs on the same plate. So this is a particular way of really making it nice and visual, and it also breaks apart the different textures on your plate. Right, so once the sauce starts to heat up, there should be a bit of skin that you'll be able to see floating right over the top. So this I only like to actually remove it very simply by just holding it towards the side of the pan, and should actually come out nice and easy. So I'm just going to dump that in there. And once you've removed the skin, proceed to slide in your meatballs. I'll also be using a spoon to just run the sauce right over each piece. So just going to toss those very gently. Of course, by allowing your meatballs to cool down, it will make it much easier for you to handle them and toss them in your bechamel sauce when you're done. So just toss that nice and easy. So as I mentioned, it's a very handy sauce, but one problem with this is you may not be able to save or store it after the first making. So you may have to make this from scratch every single time. That's the only letdown about a bechamel. Right, so once your meatballs are beautifully coated, so what I like to do is I like to start plating with my starches first. So I'm going to just lay those right over the side like that. And then of course always be sure to drizzle a bit of sauce over each piece before it comes out of the pan. You can place that right over the side like that. And I hope you're learning a bit of tips on plating, yeah? So of course these are very, and for those of you watching from home, of course like to always share some very simple tips of plating. I know most of us have pretty much gone out there and enjoyed some beautiful cuisines that are presented to you in a nice beautiful fashion. And we also like to carry the same philosophy on this show by teaching you just how it's done. Right, so once that's on the plate, just proceed to grab the rest of your sauce, and you can run that right over each piece.
Wow.
So this of course guarantees that your meatballs are not dry. Also makes sure that you actually get a nice even serving of the same sauce on each piece. Simple as that. Right, once that's done, you can pretty much just turn your plate almost to the side like that. Now what do you think we should plate next? What is easier between the salad and the fries?
The fries?
The fries, perfect. So very simply, toss your fries a bit in your seasoning, and very importantly, always remember some salt.
That Personally, I don't.
But you're not a big fan of salt, so I've put a very, very little bit.
Yeah.
Right, so once that is tossed through, can proceed to move those to the corner of the plate. And as you can see, basically it's a technique of making your plate look bigger. Right, so just going to go over once more with some fries. And of course, now to finish this off and to really, really give it that beautiful look, I'm going to begin by grabbing a bit of my onions. And I'm just going to place them over the sauce that we put on the plate a little earlier. So I'm actually just looking for a bit of symmetry. So maybe I'll start with a small one, a medium one, and a big one. And then very simply proceed to add your arugula leaves right at the end here. Simple as that. And you can actually just add about 2 or 3 pieces over that just to give it a nice boost of color. Very simple, yeah?
Yeah.
And then next up, I like to just garnish with some tomato wedges. So I like to just use about 3 or 4 wedges, just place them right over the sides like that. And what happens, it always brings a nice beautiful change of color on your plate. It also nicely brings and complements the beautiful aspect of having some beautiful fresh vegetables with a bit of meat and a bit of starch. And that gives you a nice, beautiful, all-round nutritious meal. So this would basically even pass a test if it was to qualify even as a nutritionist.
Oh.
So as a nutritionist, you basically covered your starch, your meat, and a bit of vegetable or salad. Right. So we pretty much finished plating all that. But very, very importantly, I would like for you to at least give it a taste and tell us how we did today. So I'm just going to grab my pair of spoon at the back here. And what we'll do is we're just going to slice this over the board. Right, so very simple. I'm going to just slice that in half. So you can actually be able to see the inside, and you can see it's nicely cooked through. But very, very importantly, I would like for you to taste this for us. So I'm going to allow for you to try that and maybe give us your feedback and what you think of the meatballs you've learned how to make today.
Okay,
all right.
It's happening.
What do you think?
I might even finish the whole plate. It's very sweet, very, I can taste all the
inside. All the ingredients we added, you can taste them.
Yeah, very
and it's
juicy,
not dry.
Yeah. The sauce. I've never
simple and easy.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, it doesn't have many ingredients. I think we only use 3 ingredients. Normally it would call for the addition of nutmeg, which I didn't have on the show today. So we pretty much made the simplest version of that sauce. Right.
It's very tasty.
So can we close the show now?
Yeah.
Right. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, I will thank you for tuning in this far. I do also thank the beautiful Milkah for joining us on the show today. I do hope you've learned something new and you can be able to take this home with you as well.
Yeah. And thank you so much. I've learned a lot. Be sure I'll be back here again. Thank
you very much, Milkah. So for those of you who are still tuned in, thank you once again. We will bid you farewell at this stage, wishing you God's blessings, a beautiful evening, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.